If you've played Terraria for an extended period of time, then you've most likely partook in some of the seasonal events that the game has to offer. The most notable ones being the Frost Moon and the Pumpkin Moon. Both of these events are unique and also pretty difficult, but don't worry, I'm not going to give you a wiki page read about them. I'll save that for another video. No, what I want to focus on in this video are the various enemies that are showcased in both of these events. And just for fun, I'm going to put them all in a list of easiest to hardest. Except for the Present Mimic, since I don't really count that as a regular enemy, so I'm sorry. Also, I would like to note that any stats listed in this video are going to be Master Mode stats exclusively, so if you want to be that one annoying guy and be like, well, your data is actually wrong here, it isn't. So just want to make sure that we're all clear on that front. All right, you got it? All right, cool. So discounting the Present Mimic, there are 15 different types of enemies in both events combined. And if you've played the events themselves, then you may be thinking, well, hold on, there's a lot more than that, right? And I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, but in all actuality, you're actually seeing just multiple variants of one enemy. And that may not make sense right now, but trust me, it'll all make sense in a second. And that second is right now, because we are getting started. Starting at number 15 on this list, I'm grouping together all of the enemies that I like to call cannon fodder enemies. Now, when I say cannon fodder enemies, I'm talking about all of the enemies that have no special traits about them aside from just basically being reskinned zombies. These enemies are usually really slow, easy to avoid, like I said, reskinned zombies. But despite all of that, both the Frost Moon and the Pumpkin Moon cannon fodder enemies are pretty freaking powerful, but they're all still pretty similar to one another, which is why I'm grouping them together in the 15th spot. Despite all of that though, I'm still going to rank all of these enemies from least hard to most hard. Starting off at the bottom are the Scarecrows. These guys are without a doubt the easiest enemies to avoid in the Pumpkin Moon. All you gotta do is just lure them into a pit of some kind and they can't reach you at all. The Scarecrow itself actually has 10 different variants that it can spawn as, but really the main difference between all of them is just the sprite, the damage, and the health. The health of a Scarecrow can range from 900 all the way up to nearly 1500 depending on the variant. But like I said, if you stay a good distance above them, they aren't really much of a threat at all, just some easy points. And in a similar vein, the zombie elves are essentially the same thing as the Scarecrows, except instead of 10 different variants, there's only 3 for the zombie elves. A boy zombie, a bearded zombie, and a girl zombie. The bearded zombie has the most health at 1575 health, while the girl zombie only has 1125 health, but she does a lot more damage than the bearded zombie. And the regular boy zombie is just a mix of the two in terms of stats. And just like the Scarecrows, these guys can be easily avoided by just flying above them. If you have a decent sized arena, just make sure that none of them land on your head, since that can happen. And next up is the Gingerbread Man. This goofy looking little dude is definitely not one to be trifled with in hand-to-hand combat. With almost 1700 health and dealing up to 202 damage, yeah, you don't want to accidentally run up against this guy. With that being said though, he's still a fodder enemy, and he can still be easily avoided by just staying above him. And lastly in this place is the Splinterling. These guys have more health than the Gingerbread Man, and they pack a much harder punch, dealing 225 contact damage. So just make sure as long as these guys are on the field, you're clear of the ground. And with all that being said, that was 15th place. We got all the fodder enemies taken care of, so the rest of these are probably going to go by pretty quickly, since for a majority of these guys, there really isn't much special about them, but they're different enough to warrant a unique placement on this list. And one of those enemies coming in at number 14 is the Hellhound. Now, I was almost gonna put this guy in the cannon fodder category, but I think that they're unique enough to warrant this placement, at least in my opinion. The main problem with Hellhounds that I found is their speed and knockback resistance. These guys have 76% knockback resistance, and because they use the Unicorn AI, they're really fast, and along with that, they can deal up to 180 damage if they make contact with you. But like most ground-based enemies, staying above them on an elevated platform or on something like a witch's broom is usually enough to render them almost useless, so that's why they're in 14th place. At unlucky number 13, we have the Nutcracker. This is essentially the exact same enemy as the Hellhound, except it deals a little bit more damage, has a little bit more health, and like the Hellhound, it shares the fact that if you simply stay above it, it can't deal any damage to you. Definitely would be a lot higher if it wasn't limited by that one factor, but unfortunately for the Nutcracker, it can't fly, so it's placed in the 13th spot. The 12th spot on this list contains the one and the only, the big and the bad, Krampus. This guy is essentially the big brother of the Nutcracker. I mean, who would have thought that more health and more damage equals a tougher enemy? I mean, couldn't have been me. The only real threat that Krampus poses is the fact that he's a bit taller than your average ground-based enemy, but still, he's limited to the floor, and as a result, his effectiveness is essentially neutered if you stay a good distance above him. And at number 11 is the Yeti. This guy is legitimately the exact same enemy as Krampus, except he's got a little over 2,000 more health, and he deals about 100 more damage. Yep, same chick, different makeup. It doesn't make a huge difference unless you just like staying on the ground half the time you fight the Frost Moon. And for an enemy that only appears in the later waves, it doesn't really add much, and therefore he sits in the number 11 spot. Maybe give him a poop throwing ability or something. That would be kind of interesting. And at the number 10 spot sits the flying snowflake Flocko. Flocko, I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly because I really don't want a grammar nerd getting mad at me in the comments. And you know what? F it. Flocko is the first flying enemy on this list, and in my opinion, he's definitely the weakest. Yeah, his difficulty is amplified by everything else going on around him, but he doesn't really have that much health, and the fact that his defense is super low, even lower than the zombie elves, makes him one of the easier enemies to kill in the Frost Moon. However, the reason he's in the number 10 spot is because when he catches you off guard, he can deal some critical damage. So just make sure you keep a watch out for him whenever you get to the later waves. At number 9 is the spooky, scary, not skeleton, but poltergeist. The poltergeist moves a lot slower than Flocko does, but what pushes him a little bit higher than Flocko in my opinion is the fact that they have a lot more defense and they deal a little bit more contact damage. Also, they spawn a lot earlier in the Pumpkin Moon compared to Flocko in the Frost Moon, so as a result, they're much more likely to be a threat. Other than that though, poltergeists are slow but rather tanky enemies, and as a result, they're in the number 9 spot. The Headless Horseman is up next at number 8, and in my opinion, he compiles both a ground enemy and a flying enemy almost perfectly. What do I mean by this? Well, on his own, if you're on the ground, the Headless Horseman is easily the fastest ground enemy in the entire event. And as a result, if you don't have any way to dodge him, you're gonna have a pretty tough time. Along with that, his secondary attack, which is him tossing a homing pumpkin head towards you, can easily be devastating if you're not paying attention. Combine 100% knockback resistance along with a high health pool, and you got yourself a recipe for disaster if not given attention. And at the number 7 spot is easily one of my least favorite enemies in the Frost Moon, the Elf Archer. What makes the Elf Archer so insane is the obscene amount of damage that it deals, despite being a relatively low tier enemy. If you directly contact an Elf Archer, it can deal up to 157 damage. But if an arrow hits you, it can deal up to 270 damage, along with a 33% chance to light you on fire, dealing extra damage on top of that. Now put about 7 of these on the field, and you got yourself one of the most annoying enemies in either event. That's why these guys are at number 7. They're absolutely terrible. And at number 6 is the even worse Elf Copter. What makes these guys worse than the Elf Archer? Don't worry, I'll tell you. 675 more total health, a very slightly less potent but more constant stream of damage. Combine that with the fact that they fly to wherever your current location is, And you got yourself one of the most frustrating enemies to deal with, bar none. And what makes them even harder to deal with are all of the other enemies that you're having to worry about, like Everscreams. Combine all of that, and it's an absolutely gourmet recipe for disaster. That's why they sit at the number 6 spot. They're terrible. Alright, that was a lot to get through. Now we're into the top 5. Easily the most frustrating and hardest enemies to deal with in either of these events. Let's just get started with number 5, the Morning Wood. Yes, that is his actual name. I'll give you 5 seconds for your juvenile butt to laugh about it. You done? Alright, we can continue now. The Morning Wood is the first mini-boss on this list, and as a result, he really pulls his weight. Every single attack does over 240 damage, and with 23,000 health, this big guy is a force to be reckoned with. His most devastating attack is his Flaming Wood attack, specifically when he's below 25% health. This attack involves the Morning Wood firing a bunch of flaming spikes towards the player. And when below 25% health, this attack can deal up to 450 damage, making it one of the most devastating attacks in the entire game. The Morning Wood also has an attack called Greek Fire, where it fires a large amount of bouncy fireballs towards the player. This attack can also be devastating, but if you're far enough and if you're off the ground, then it isn't that bad. It's still an extremely dangerous attack though. Thankfully, the Morning Wood is a large enemy, pause on that by the way, and as a result, most weapons can easily hit and damage it. If you get hit by any of his attacks though, it's gonna absolutely cripple your health, and as a result, he sits in 5th place. And in 4th place, we have the Christmas version of the Morning Wood, the Everscream. This enemy holds a lot more than just a silly pun as its name. It also deals an absolute bonkers amount of damage. Why? Because screw you! That's why. The Everscream has 2 attacks, its Pine Needle attack and his Ornament attack. The Pine Needle attack is essentially the exact same thing as the Morning Wood's Greek Fire attack, except any chance you had of dodging the Greek Fire attack has been completely thrown out the window with this attack. The Pine Needles are fired ridiculously fast, and they fly really fast as well. And on top of all of that, they fly in completely random directions, albeit they're still aimed towards your general location. The Ornament attack involves the Everscream tossing a few ornaments out. Not very high, but that doesn't really matter because if the ornaments didn't get you, then the shrapnel from their explosion absolutely will if you aren't paying attention. But once again, like the Morning Wood, the Everscream is a large enemy, and as a result, he's very easy to hit, allowing you to take them down with relative ease so long as there isn't anything in your way, which there usually is, and that's why these guys are placed at number 4. We're starting off the top 3 with a big one. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the Pumpkin. The final and hardest enemy that you'll face in the Pumpkin Moon, the Pumpkin is arguably one of the coolest designed enemies in the game, although I might be a little bit biased because I freaking love jack-o'-lanterns. And along with a cool sprite, the Pumpkin also delivers some pretty devastating blows if you're not careful. His most dangerous attack is his Flaming Scythe attack, which can deal up to 360 damage, once again, making it one of the most devastating attacks in the game. With over 40,000 health, the Pumpkin will often not be alone. He'll often be accompanied by Morning Woods, poltergeists, and all sorts of other nasty monsters, which does amplify his difficulty quite a bit, although he is definitely the easier of the 2 main bosses in my opinion, which is why he's at the number 3 spot. This next enemy is arguably the most capable damage dealer of all of the enemies listed. Coming in at the number 2 spot, Santa NK1. This is the Frost Moon's second mini-boss, and it is one of the most insane damage dealers in this game. Let's go ahead and list off why he's so powerful. Number 1, everything. While the Everscream was rolling up with 21,000 health and about 38 defense, Santa NK1 is rolling up with almost 30,000 health and 56 defense, which already makes him a tank. But there's even more to him than that. He's an absolutely bonkers damage dealer. 270 contact damage, 216 damage dealt from his chain gun per bullet, 480 damage from the spikes he lays across the field, 252 damage from the missiles he fires, and 300 damage from the presents, which he fires in the air, only for them to slowly make their way back down to Earth, all the while they deal constant damage to anyone they come in contact with on their way down. Santa NK1 is without a doubt one of the most powerful mini-bosses in the entire game, but he's beaten out by the mini-boss in the number 1 spot, which, if you've played Terraria, you probably know who it is. The Ice Queen deserves the number 1 spot on this list. She is absolutely ridiculous, which makes sense since she's the final mini-boss of one of the hardest events in the game. Let me just list why she's so terrible real quick. First of all, her health. The Ice Queen is rolling up with 56,355 health, but that's not all. Her attacks are just as bad. Direct contact with the Ice Queen herself can deal 270 damage, and her Frost Wave attack can deal 252 damage, along with having a 100% chance to inflict the Chilled debuff, which can almost half your movement speed for 25 seconds. And along with that, it also has a 17% chance to inflict the Frozen debuff, which will completely immobilize you for up to 2.5 seconds, in which you're almost guaranteed to die. Her final attack is her Frost Shard attack, where she'll either hover right above your head and attempt to spew ice shards on top of you, or she'll spin in a circle, sending dozens upon dozens of shards absolutely everywhere. And to top it all off, these Frost Shards also have a 66.7% chance to inflict the Chilled debuff as well. Combine all of that with the fact that the Ice Queen is constantly darting across the screen like a flying squirrel, and you've got yourself a recipe for the hardest mini-boss in both of these events. But the worst part about the Ice Queen is that not only can she spawn alongside Everscreams and Santa NK1s, but multiple Ice Queens can be on the battlefield at the same time. Do I need to say anything else? I don't think I do. The Ice Queen is number 1 on this list, and unless they update the Frost or Pumpkin Moon with an even harder enemy, or they do any balance changes, that's probably where she's gonna stay. And with that, the list is complete. Here's the full list for you to gaze your beautiful eyes upon. If you have any agreements or objections, make sure to tell me in the comment section, and until next time, this is Ian Sheehan 35, signing out.